when Dalibor was talking about the city as in a way, the best expression of and repository of the human endeavour or journey, I mean, that for me is something that resonates very strongly, in the sense that my kind of lurch sideways from architecture into food, which some of you may be aware of, but I about 13 years ago, in a sort of search to try and work out what a city was, as a sort of born and bred Londoner, and to try to sort of bring something into the architectural discourse that seemed to me to be there, but somehow very difficult to discuss from within architecture. And this is something that both Dalibor and David mentioned explicitly, is the need to go outside of architecture in order to find out what it really is that architecture's in fact dealing with. And food just kind of bubbled up as something that seemed incredibly powerful as a way of, I had a curry at the time, no, exactly. But food just sort of emerged to me as a really interesting lens through which to ask these kinds of questions, or counterparts to architecture, if you like. In other words, architecture, I mean, I loved, Dalibor, what you said about history sort of moving at different speeds, depending on which bit of it you're looking at. And food, of course, is the ultimate slow mover. And if you look at where societies have come from, they've all evolved around food. The struggle to find food, to hunt, to gather, to bring food into the campsite and sit around the fire and share and so on, is so primary. And if you look at cities historically, that sort of campsiteness is explicitly recognised. The Roman city had the mundus at the centre, in which the hearth of the fire burnt, and it's very explicit. And for me now, in a way, I mean, again, a beautiful. I've just been writing down so many amazing sort of groups of words or phrases that seem to me to be incredibly resonant. But when David just mentioned now invisible continuity, to me the sort of the human condition is what we're really talking about here, and that's what architecture tends to respond to. And there is a sort of struggle to reconcile the animal in us, which needs to eat and drink, and also the animal in us which needs to socialise, and our unique capacity to think in the abstract, and how those things kind of find a place. And I think what the city does is it both, I mean, I like sort of rather provocatively calling cities human nests, because it seems to me to sort of shake a conception about a city that possibly arose out of modernist thinking. But, you could call our need to eat and the very physical manifestations of that, a very, very powerful invisible continuity that in a sense we exist in a kind of tension with, because, as architects, of course we want to embody life and we want to sort of make things beautiful. I mean, I think that also sort of speaks about the sort of the desire to address the human condition and make some sense of it, rather than just deal with it on a very everyday level. And that's why we get beautiful gestures, and that's architecture at its most wondrous, is when it sort of reflects back at us the struggle that we have and actually says, you're not on your own. This has been going on for a very long time. That's one incredible thing that cities do. I also happen to be reading, I've got so many things that I could say, but I mean, anyway, I'll scrub those out. I'll go to one thing. When Dalibor said that the street, and I completely, agree with him, and this is something I struggled with a lot myself. I mean, the street somehow seems to embody everything that a city does in this beautifully, apparently effortless way. Although, of course, we know it's the product of thousands of years of evolution that's arrived at such an apparently effortless, beautiful balancing between the tensions of the need for privacy, the need for publicness, and whatever that means, the kind of sense of your own space, but also a sense of the commons. I mean, that's also something that, of course, is very resonant in the world of food. And I just thought to myself, you know, in a sense, the table is the beautiful counterpart to the street. We all know how to behave around a table. You know, when we're sharing food, there's something so latent. I mean, it's probably, the space of the table is probably the closest thing we've got in contemporary life to an intuitive shared understanding about ritual and what that means. You know, because I'm absolutely sure, I mean, we're going to have nibbles, aren't we, in a minute? So I'm absolutely sure that, for instance, if, you know, Jose over there or David, we've got a beautiful little pile of, I don't know, cheesy pineapple ones or something, I don't know what, you know, and they're just about to sort of, they're looking forward to it, and I suddenly reach over and go, oh, I'm going to have that, thank you very much. That would be so transgressive. And it'd be even more transgressive if I dropped it on the food on the floor and stamped it out. You're even feeling in your guts now, as I say that, some revulsion at the very thought that I could behave so badly. Now that's absolutely, and I won't, by the way, so don't worry. But I mean, isn't that fascinating? And I think, you know, the table, for me, this is why food is such a fascinating portal or lens into understanding the kind of the questions that Dalibor and Peter and David and Eric have been enlightening us all about for the last, I don't want to say how many years, but I hear you all say, you know, which is why it's such a pleasure and privilege to be here. I know the embarrassment starts, but luckily we have wine. But you know, for me, food, it's not an alternative to everything that these incredible people here have shared with us, you know, and tried to teach us about what architecture means. It's another way of you know, sort of saying all of the same things in a way that we intuitively, viscerally encounter, in my case, at least 3 times a day. And so I just want to sort of, you know, and it's a great privilege and honour for me to be asked to speak at this table, as I say, and a huge embarrassment to have gone to the wrong place initially. But what I would say is that, you know, I would. It's wonderful that you see that as a sort of a valid addition to the mix, because I do think it just adds another very easy to understand. I mean, we were talking about sort of simplicity and complexity in very many different ways over the last hour or so. Food has that within it. You know, it has this spectrum of the necessary and the symbolic, the very, very simple, as in I'm hungry, give me food, and, you know, everything else, the idea of what life is about, as a metaphor, is extremely powerful. And I think as a counterpoint to the architectural discourse, the discourse about food brings a sort of a beautiful sort of additional way of seeing, voice, balance to the table, literally. So I think that I have many other specific things. Just to say, I mean, Dalibor said, you know, the city is all about what you share. You know, and, well, paraphrasing you in a slightly imperfect way, but, you know, the space of the street, which can be at its best, as Jane Jacobs wonderfully, you know, sort of spoke about, when it's really understood what that space is about, when it's valued, when people understand the value, the incredible value of a space that has this sort of deep understanding within it, that we know how to behave on a street, actually, we do. That food just sort of brings that to a sort of another level of visibility, if you like, and seen together. I mean, you were showing earlier on the market space, you know, and you were saying there's the church and there's the city hall, and I was going, there's the food, because that is what would have been traded in that market. And those 3 things together, it seems to me, do represent not only civic order, but also, you know, the sort of the strands, the sort of the competing, and, you know, the triad that sort of underpins the, you know, the urban attempt to represent the human condition, and also the struggle that we all undergo as individuals coming together in some recognisable and shareable form.